Let's give you some news. Just in, the electoral amendment bill has been signed into law. It paves the way for the independent candidates to contest positions in the National Assembly and provincial legislatures, but there are certain requirements that must be met. These include the inspection of copies of lists and their accompanying documents. Home Affairs Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi will now have to establish the electoral reform consultation panel within 4 months of gazetting the amendments. So let's discuss this further now. We are joined by Lukhona Mnguni, who hosts our current affairs show On the Spot, but he's also part of the Rivonia Circle, which has been very vocal about the changes needed in our electoral bill. Is it a good thing Parliament did adopt it in February? We've been waiting a couple of weeks for the President to finally sign it into law. Are you in support?
No, not at all, Maseko. This is a travesty of justice, in actual fact, on our view, and we've already started some preliminary conversations with our partners who attended the electoral reform in Ndaba last year, September, to think of what is the way forward. We have already been in conversations with legal teams in potentially briefing them for a court challenge if the president were to sign this defective electoral amendment bill. And I think later on today we will be having a meeting and we will be deciding on a very clear pathway forward. But I have no doubt that we are most likely going to find ourselves in court next week or at the very earliest possible date and challenge this bill, because as you and I have spoken before on this very show of yours about the challenges with this bill, is that political parties are doing a self-preservation order via this bill and shutting out independent candidates from effectively participating in the national and provincial elections of 2024. There are barriers to entry, which those barriers to entry are now going to also affect new political parties that want to come into the space. For example, independent candidates are said that they must get 15% of so when you register to contest an election or as an independent candidate, you need signatures. So now they need 15% of the number of votes that were needed in the previous election to get a seat. So if you needed 40,000 votes to get a seat in the National Assembly, an independent candidate would need about 6,000 signatures in order for them to stand. But of course, there's also the other challenge. What if you need 40,000 votes to get a seat and an independent candidate gets 120,000 votes, which means that cumulatively they are actually worthy of 3 seats. The 2 seats would be reassigned to political parties. That, of course, is a problem because it would distort the will of the people because they wouldn't have voted for those parties to get as much as those seats. Yes, an independent can only occupy 1 seat. That's why we are of the view and have been of the view that you can't give material effect to the judgment of the Constitutional Court of June 2020 without necessarily coming up with constituencies in South Africa. Now, people say we don't have time to do that, to do the demarcations and all of that ahead of the 2024 elections. But the truth is that we did have time. But an inept parliament and an inept Minister of Home Affairs who sat on the process and decided to do nothing about the Constitutional Court judgment for almost a year are responsible for us being here, and we cannot then as civil society organizations be castigated just simply for trying to make sure that we end up with the most constitutional act as possible. What the president has signed and has announced to have signed, of course, we still need more details in terms of when it comes into commencement and all of that, but given that he has signed and it's intended to be the law of the land, we will do everything in our efforts, both legally and in terms of advocacy, to challenge this defective bill, which is now an act.
And I mean, South Africans are expected to take to the polls by May next year, at least, unless they move it again to another period in the same year. But at the end of the day, 2024, we take to national government elections. And my worry, Lukhona, I don't know about you, is that a lot of South Africans that you speak to are still not really clued up. They're still very confused about what this means and whether or not it allows the mixed constituency proportion.
Well, it does allow the mixed it does allow a semblance of a mixed voting system, but it's a defective mix, and it's defective in this way. So the bill determines that the province is a constituency. So if you are in KwaZulu-Natal and you are an independent candidate, you reside in Kokstad, it means that you must galvanize votes and support from Kokstad as much as you galvanize votes and support from Kanyagude. Now, political parties are able to do that because by virtue of being institutions, they're able to warehouse different infrastructure compared to independent candidates. Independent candidates solely rely on themselves and some small campaign team that usually accompanies them. And political funders are less attracted to independent candidates because it only translates to one seat amongst 400 seats in the National Assembly, right? So you are more attracted to political parties, and they are most likely to attract funding, those political parties. So that's why we need to fight the issue of a province being seen as a constituency. And secondly, we need to fight independent candidates being made to, challenge an election against political parties rather than individuals from political parties as it pertains in our local government elections. Because the problem there, Masego, is that the principle of one person, one vote of equal value is distorted. Because if I vote for an independent candidate, I am less likely to influence more seats than one compared to a person who votes for a political party. Yet in the ward, if you vote for an independent candidate versus an individual from a party, the outcome is quite attractive in terms of being of equal value of the vote.
So maybe this then should rather go back to the Constitutional Court for them to, for the justices to look at the constitutionality of it all before we find ourselves suddenly in 2024.
No, certainly. And some letters were sent to the president, and the advice that was coming from colleagues in civil society to the president was that, one, he needs to get legal opinion from the state attorney's office. And secondly, on the basis of that legal opinion, and of course, we will be asking the presidency, I will be writing to Vincent, the presidential spokesperson soon, to check if we can be availed with any legal opinion that was availed to the president before he signed this bill. And secondly, the advice was that he returns this bill on the basis of constitutionality to Parliament for further examination by Parliament. Because even parliamentarians and political parties that supported this bill are very aware of the serious defects that are there on the bill, or that the president takes the matter to the Constitutional Court for a review on the constitutionality of the bill. Unfortunately, he has now signed, and therefore the only people who can now take the bill to the Constitutional Court are civil society actors.
Just lastly, Lukhona, I asked this question to your colleague yesterday, who's become the new chairperson, Lorato Tegeg, who's become the new chairperson of Rivonia Circle. And he wasn't fully in agreement with Terizilani, whom we've spoken to, who suggested that perhaps we shouldn't have the bill amended for 2024 and rather have it amended for another election year so that we avoid jeopardizing the elections that are coming so soon. What do you think?
Well, Maseko, I think we are now going to be at the mercy of the courts because, one, what is quite clear is that there's keenness among civil society partners to take this bill to the Constitutional Court. Of course, I think one of the issues that might need to be done as Part A is to interdict the commencement of this act as legislation, which then would mean that the IEC can't use this act as a basis of changing its systems to manage the elections of 2024. The truth of it is that we could get to a situation where 2024 elections happen under the old Electoral Act, particularly if there is no satisfactory court outcome, one. Also, secondly, if there is not enough time for the IEC to effect the systems that would give material effect to whatever product we end up with after litigation, or if the act is struck down and Parliament is instructed to, restart the process of formulation of this bill, then yes, in those instances, there is high possibility that we will go with the old Electoral Act, because what is proving difficult, Maseko, is making constitutional this bill under its current prescripts. It's not possible to do that. And some colleagues in civil society have been very empathetic to the cause of the IEC, to the cause of the process, to say, perhaps let's find a way to help this bill along and run elections with it in 2024. Because, Maseko, as you said in your introduction, the minister has to constitute another panel that is going to investigate an electoral system. That's already an admission inherent in the bill that this bill is not the most desirable piece of legislation. Therefore, why must we help something that could actually visit us with more problems as a country and help it and cause us to maybe open up the elections of 2024 to litigation post the election, where some people might, challenge the freeness, the fairness, and the credibility of the election because it was run on a defective bill. So yes, there is still, I think, in my mind, a possibility that the 2024 elections will happen under the old Electoral Act that only accepts political parties as players in national and provincial elections.
For instance, even the IEC said that it would need about 18 months to prepare for elections. Already, we are looking at less than 18 months because there's 12 months left if we do vote, for instance, in May. So there's either the delay of elections or it's just a very confusing thing for me. So it's either the elections are delayed or the elections do happen, but they are not necessarily fair.
Well, yes, Maseko. The Constitutional Court has set precedents with the 2021 local government elections that it's undesirable for elected public representatives to live a day longer in office than their mandate is stated. So the Constitution is very clear that you can have elections on the 5th anniversary of the previous elections, but you've got a window period of 90 days since from then. So elections can effectively take place between the 7th of May, if I'm not mistaken, and the 7th of August, 2024. So that's the window period that is available. Anything beyond that is unconstitutional and would be an illegal extension of mandate for public representatives. So yes, we do need certainty, but unfortunately, civil society is not the ones to blame for the uncertainty. The Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, must take full responsibility for having delayed this process, moved at a snail's pace. Parliament must take full responsibility for having relied on the Minister of Home Affairs to be the initiator of the bill, whereas the Constitutional Court had vested the power to Parliament for the amendment of the Electoral Act. And the fact that we are now trying to repair a defective bill cannot be seen as civil society creating uncertainty. It must locate uncertainty being created by those role players who have material interest to protect political parties as uncontestable entities in the political landscape and entrenching the rule of political parties and further eroding the mandate of constituencies and South Africans at large.
Lukhona, when you mentioned Parliament, you're opening another can of worms because now we would have to discuss whether or not they actually do practice their oversight role, which, the State Capture Commission of Inquiry found that they are lacking in that aspect. But I have to leave it there for now. Lukhona Mnguni of Rivonia Circle. He is also the host of our current affairs show On the Spot with Lukhona Mnguni, which airs every Sunday at 12 o'clock.